thanks for the introduction, Jamie.
Sure.
So first of all, for those who don't know me, my name is Christian Busse. I'm a project lead at German Cancer Research Center in Heidelberg, and I've been mainly involved in the AIRR community or in the AIRR community's activity for minimal standards, basically for the last 5 years. So a little bit of background. When Jamie initially asked me about running this panel, then I thought, well, maybe it's actually time after, well, 4 to 5 years of FAIR, or however you do the counting, actually to look back on a more, to have a more broader view on this whole topic. So not exactly at our nitty-gritty details in regard to AIRR-seq data, but actually did FAIR deliver what people set out it to do, and is it on a good path to bring us to a more integrative and more collaborative science? And this is basically what we will discuss now over the next 50 minutes. And I'm very happy to have 3 excellent panelists with me who've all accepted this invitation on a rather short notice. So I'm also very happy for that. I will give a very brief introduction to each of them, which will probably not give full due to their extensive experience. But nevertheless should give you some idea on who's on the panel. And so we will just start in alphabetical order. So first of all, we have Christine Choirat. She's Chief Health Data Scientist at the Swiss Data Science Center. Moved there recently from a position that she held before in Harvard. She's a statistician by training, and is also part of the EOSC FAIR working group and also of the executive board. Exactly. So I'm going to do the 3 introductions first, and then we are going to start with the statements. And you can start your video streams now if you want to. Okay, then the second person is Eva Maria Moar. She's a lawyer by training, has been working for a long time at EURAC in beautiful Bolzano, and has been doing a lot of work on basically intellectual property rights, which is one of the things that we will focus on in the later part of the of our discussion panel. Okay, and then the final person is Rob Hooft, who's who's basically working at the Dutch Tech Center for Life Sciences. He's a node manager for Elixir. He has been active for a long time in the RDA, so both in the Elixir Bridge Force Interest Group, and now more recently in the RDA COVID-19 endeavors that also some AIRR community members took part. And also he is a member of the EOSC FAIR Working Group and the executive board. So welcome everyone. Okay, so with this one, I would like to move to basically the initial statements about what is actually, so how do you currently, so what is your current perception of the state of fair data, and what are the main challenges to fair data or data fairness in general that you see for the intermediate future? And we'll probably just start with Christine.
Thank you, Christian. So thanks for having me. So hello to everyone. Maybe, so FAIR, so it was like 4 or 5 years ago. I was in Boston at the time, actually, with Merce Corsas, who is one of the co-authors of the original paper. I think it created a a very clear like who would not want to be fair, right? So that's what has been happening for the past 4 or 5 years, and what I've been seeing a lot is the way it's been like the way to transform guiding principles into an implementation that is going to help collaborative science. So in a sense, maybe take at the beginning a position that is a bit of balance, where I would say that what I've been seeing a lot is that everybody is accepting the importance of fairness. Everybody understands the definitions, but it might be turning into an objective per se, if that makes sense, like with committees and norms, etc., where we forget where we want to be fair in the first place.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Then we would continue with Eva. You're still on mute, or was I still on mute?
So still have to learn a lot regarding
okay.
these online panels. Some automatism is not already in place. So so thank you very much for inviting me, and hello. So as you said, Christian, I'm looking into the FAIR issues with I would say 2 hats. So one is the hat as a research support service. So I'm in a research organization and leading this support service. So I see the necessity to increase data management competencies among researchers of all ages, of all disciplines in the institution, and in order to guarantee high quality research data. And I think FAIR is quite a good way how to go there, and how to come to a good point. And I see also then some practical implementation problems researchers face when implementing these principles and so on. But I also have the other hat as an RTO, so as a research and technology organization. We are working closely with the European Association for Research and Technology organizations, the EARTO. And in this role, as a representative of an organization, let's say, I also have had sometimes with a headache when talking about FAIR, and especially of sharing data. And because when you're working with as a research development innovation stakeholder with industry in the innovation cycle, there might arise some sensitive issues, let's say, with regard to data, especially with opening data. So therefore my statement would be today that yes, as a RTO, I think as Christine said, the FAIR is broadly understood as a standard now, I think, for responsible management of research data. However, I think there's quite some confusion regarding terminology, so which has an impact also then in the implementation and the willingness of implement data, because I think we have to pay attention that FAIR is not, or we have to stress that FAIR is not the same as free of charge, and FAIR is not the same as open. So this would be my thesis just to put here. I don't know whether you want to expand or then discussion. So this is the aspect I would like to bring into this discussion.
Yes, this is the thing that I would like to discuss in the basically last quarter of the of our session then.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, then thank you. And then Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Christian, for allowing me to take part in this panel discussion. Thank you very much for the invitation. I am author number 27 out of the 54 of the original FAIR paper. And it was a really, really interesting meeting at the beginning of 2014, where the foundations for the FAIR principles were laid down. From very early interpretations, I am often quoting Cameron Neylon, who wrote, FAIR is a journey and not a destination. And I see that a lot of people actually see, and they're talking about FAIR as if it is something you can achieve, rather than something that you will always strive for. And definitely not all the aspects of FAIR have been implemented in the same way in the community and in different communities in different fashions. So findability, I think a lot of progress has been made, but for interoperability of data, there is a lot still needed. And communities like your own are essential to formulate how interoperability can be guaranteed. Well, how do you do FAIR then? I think for the moment, I am advising people, researchers, to go at the beginning of a research project with a data steward through the FAIR principles, and to see for each of them what the benefit would be of implementing that at the moment, and how much effort it is. So make a cost-benefit analysis of each of the FAIR principles to see what you actually can do cheaply and have the most benefit from. Of course, what we expect is that over the coming years still, the supporting infrastructure for FAIR will be better and better. And then it will become easier and easier to implement FAIR principles and get more and more value. So I think if you're looking at this journey that we call FAIR, I think my statement is we came very far, but we still have a lot to do.
Okay, thank you. Then we would directly continue with you and basically take it a little bit back in the history. So. Because also, as you said, I mean, FAIR is a journey, and also the AIRR community learned a lot of things along the way. But so from the perspective of someone who has been involved here very, very early on, what were the most critical events that really catalyzed the adoption of FAIR?
Well, I think there was one seminal moment during the initial meeting that I just called in the beginning of 2014, where George Strawn, at that moment working for very closely with the President of the United States, said, you know, we've been designing the internet a long time ago with the architecture of an hourglass, and we have to make sure that we are defining something that is as small as the narrow part of the hourglass, and that connects all the data in the world to all the users that are there, just like we did for the internet in the early 1970s. So that was very important. And what we noticed very quickly after that meeting, actually, that is that FAIR was adopted incredibly fast by huge organizations. So we were very surprised to see that, for instance, the G20 and the G8 immediately jumped on the bandwagon and really mentioned FAIR as the principles that could help towards the larger goals in the world. So those are definitely, it helped to have those kind of large worldwide organization mention FAIR as one of the things to pursue. I think that's those are two very important things that helped the principles forward.
Okay, so early adoption and by major players and smart design in terms of that you were flexible to start with.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a fantastic acronym.
Yes, it probably
I think this is really very important, especially for the acceptance and for raising awareness among researchers. I mean, we see it as a research support service. It just really popped up, and really, it's very clear, it's very understandable for the researchers, and you can structure trainings, and it's really catchy. I mean, I think this is one of the main achievements. It's that they combined the known principles of data management into a really a catchy concept. Let's say it's principles, it's a concept, and I think for structuring it is important for researchers that they know what they have to do step by step. Also, maybe not everything at the very first time, but slowly, I think they are getting more. Yeah, they're increasing their competences thanks to this acronym.
So, if I was there for you, any special event that in your perception gave basically a larger boost to FAIR adoption?
Well, I think from my point of view, supporting researchers also in writing projects and getting third-party funds, I think the most important, let's say, catalyst moment was that some research funders took the concept up and made it a precondition for funding. This is what I saw from my work experience, from my operational work experience with the researchers, let's say. Yes, definitely. So what Rob said, I think this is really so researchers, they tend not to increase their workload, let's say, with something they don't have to do. So they want to do research. So if they don't have a kind of motivation, extrinsic or intrinsic, doesn't matter, to do something, it's really difficult. I mean, they just don't have time also. And so since it has been a precondition to make data management plans according to specific principles based on the FAIR principles now, I think this is really, really very much giving or increasing the awareness and acceptance and implementation of the FAIR principles.
Can I jump in on that for a moment? So I very much agree that it is great for the FAIR principles that they're adopted by funders, but this is a stick and I don't like sticks. It's much better if we could find a carrot. And I think, and that is really one of the things that I try to do as a research supporter, is to convince researchers that doing FAIR as the part of a data project really helps the research forward. It's not only that the data in the end is going to be fair because other people will need your data. No, I think actually you are the first reuser of your own data 3 times. The first reuser of your own data tomorrow, when you still need to remember what you did today. You are the first reuser of your own data in 3 months, when a reviewer of your paper asks you to revisit one of your analysis, and you are the reuser of your data in 2 years, when your postdoc leaves and you need to explain exactly what happened to obtain the data. And for all 3, you're going to save so much time using FAIR principles in part of your data management that it is really worth the investment. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't work on making it even easier by implementing the infrastructure that really helps the researchers to do this.
But what you say with the awareness of researchers, why they should do what and so on, and their motivation to do something, I think this goes into the direction also what is an obstacle for implementation, at least what I see, because as you said, I mean, it should not be that they have to do something for someone else, they have to do it for themselves. So what I think is one of the main challenges for the next years is really that the researchers have to be trained, they have to become more competent in this data management for themselves. But and part of this training absolutely has to be, you have to explain why they have to do it, what is in there for them, not for the funder. So they really have to see the benefit for themselves. And this is sometimes, I agree, not really easy. So, but this is, I think, then part of yeah, it's not, so it has not to be implemented only by researchers, but also by the stakeholders, like research support services and other, let's say, stakeholders in the process. So I think this is absolutely important, yes.
Okay, then Christine, I couldn't find on how long you were in Harvard, but I assume that it was
enough to remember that when Merce, who is a co-author number something, came back from that weekend, she was saying we're on to something. So that was in 2014. Okay. A long time. But if I may, so sorry, maybe you have a question. Otherwise, I may have a comment about what Rob and Eva were saying before. Is when I'm a biostatistician, so I do fairness because I was in the office of some, like physically next to somebody who was involved at the beginning, and then I was interested in reproducibility and replicability of findings because I do a lot of health policy, environmental policy. And the interesting thing, I think we have friction points in several directions. So I will try to use my fingers to show directions. So Rob, you mentioned, and Eva as well, I think we mentioned collaboration, we mentioned reuse, I mentioned reproducibility and replicability. So we want to do better science. We have objectives that are high level, right? What we want to achieve and why we want to do good science. Now, FAIR, Rob, I know marginally, I know much less, but FAIR tells me how it can help, right? And this is, I think, the important part where we have to think where we stand. So Rob, you like carrots, many funders like sticks. And so we are at this thing, you say it's a journey, and I would totally agree with that. But for some people and some funders, so we have the time axis. So in my ideal world, I would be working with co-authors, with other scientists, or with collaborators who would embrace as much as possible across, like all the way in all they're doing. Like you behave in a fair way, the way you would respect traffic lights when you drive, or you would put your seatbelt. You would just take precautions so that the entire lifespan of your project is fair, which is like this time dimension, which is not integrated yet, because it's a benefit for you, it's a benefit for your co-authors, it's a benefit for society. Unfortunately, we're not there yet, where we try to verify or whatever word at the end of the process, and that's probably too late. So try to, which brings me to an orthogonal direction, in which Rob, you also mentioned that so it's good for researchers, and it's a positive externality, like to try to be fair, but infrastructure would help, and that would be a dimension where if tooling is available, then, you know, if I know that if I use this repo, or if I use this software which is automatically going to create metadata for me or whatever, then it makes my life easier, because the burden is not entirely on me. I can rely on tools that would create an automation of fairness, right? So there's the time aspect, then there's the level of difficulties. It's entirely on my shoulders, and I don't want to do that because I need to get grants, I need to write papers, I need to etc. But if the infrastructure is in place, that's great, which leads to the question, who is going to develop the infrastructure and pay for it? And then there's probably the third dimension, which is my own broken record on that one, which is about what is a data asset. And that's a difficult conversation in many communities. In my community of statistics, you can think of data as, say, mentally the Excel spreadsheet type of thing, where you have numbers and that's a data set. For some people, it might be a bunch of images, but it might be text, it might be like what you have in biobanks, but there's also the aspect that the data by itself can live in a data symmetry. Like in many cases, it's dead, even if it's fair, who cares? It's there, nobody cares. You can search it, but you're not going to trust or reuse or whatever, because it's just a dead thing hanging around in one of the thousands of fair repos you can find. So is the code that you're producing also part of a data, broadly speaking? And I'm not entering the field of metadata or anything. Is the code a part of it? Is the workflow part of it? Like, can I have a fair workflow that would go from my input to my final result? And as part of that, is my computing environment also part of my data? So what is my data? So I would advocate for a broader definition of data, which is not only something with numbers in my field hanging around somewhere on Zenodo or some great repo, right? It takes much more than that. So this is this dimension. So the time people would understand, the commitment to infrastructure and the funding, it's an easy message. The fact that we have to be very encompassing and inclusive in how we define data is probably the most difficult aspect.
So would this go along, I mean, reading through the SRIA from EOSC. So for those who are not that deeply involved in that, that's a strategic research and innovation agenda, which is originally for the European Open Science Cloud, but which, at least in my perception, also covers more, a little bit broader open science policies for Europe. So there we did have these things in. Yes, it depends really on the community, and how people are going to transform that into avoiding to have yet 10 tons of whatever on their shoulder, so that in addition to your data, you need to have your code, your virtual containers, and your etc. So yeah, so that's true. Like some fields or some like EOSC, and I believe, I don't know enough about Elixir, but I believe like it's really community dependent. But that's not clear for all funding agencies, for example. Okay, and so would you? And if you would rate that in terms of how much it would these challenges impede the process of FAIR, or could impede the process of FAIR over in the future?
If I can take, I see FAIR, like quoting Rob, as a journey. So it's the process itself is not an achievement per se. It's guiding us to do more collaborative and better science. So I think it would it's like it's not incompatible. Like it helps along the way.
From a practical point of view, however, I think it's because there's so many elements to implement them in practice. So in theory, the principles seem to be understandable, and I think most of the researchers, when they read it, they think, okay, we're doing half of it already, or But then in practice, I think there's so many different details you have to think of, which is then also, it's one of the I think obstacles also now in this hot phase of implementation. And I'm just wondering whether we, probably not everything can be solved in the very beginning, and maybe nevertheless you have to start with somehow a base level that everybody can agree upon, and then go further. I'm just wondering, because in each discipline, I suppose there are different type of data sets. This is one of the discussions, and one of the questions we always get: what is data in my discipline, and do we have to do a fair data management plan also for this one, and so on. But somehow you have to get it started. So because I think you can't foresee all the details and all the specialities for each discipline in the beginning, because yes, the differences in the disciplines is a huge implementation problem. But I think at least discipline specific, they have to get the thing started. And then maybe in a second moment try to improve the sharing among disciplines. This is from a practical point of view. In my institute, we have different type of research, from medical to human science, humanities, and so on. So it's really hard, this aspect.
So in the last year, I've been working in the European Open Science Cloud working group that has been looking at FAIR in practice. So we've been studying how different countries in Europe have implemented FAIR and what distinction that made in how far it has come along, and also how different disciplines have implemented FAIR and what kind of problems they are encountering. What we encountered is not only technical implementation problems that can be solved with infrastructure. This is, of course, it is important, but we can work on the infrastructure, and the European Open Science Cloud actually makes a very good effort in identifying which technical infrastructure is needed and how it should be prioritized in order to get FAIR as fast as possible off the ground. However, it is much more difficult to overcome some of the obstacles in what we call social obstacles, where researchers now often get rewarded for writing papers in good journals. A researcher who makes all his data or her data open is not yet rewarded for that, even though that may be catalyzing a lot more valuable research in the future. And the same is true for open workflows, open tools, open services that really catalyze a lot of research and avoid that other researchers need to duplicate a lot of development. But can really stand on the shoulders of giants. So we really need to overcome this specific social aspect and other social aspects where people think that FAIR doesn't apply to their kind of data, or that their data is not suitable for reuse, or whatever else we encountered as social obstacles against implementation of FAIR data also needs to be done, needs to be implemented. And that's also why some of those things ended up in recommendations to the Executive Board of the European Open Science Cloud, not to be forgotten.
Okay, I think that would be a good point to throw in a question that came up in the chat from Bjorn, which says, is FAIR so well accepted because it's underdefined in what it means FAIR? It seems that there is a set of aspirational goals rather than a specific specification that a resource can be tested. Are there efforts to make FAIR principles testable or operationalizable?
Let me pick that up. Yes, the first FAIR paper, of course, indeed was very much FAIR principles. So it doesn't give any implementation details. And it also had the weakness that it really was very terse. It didn't give a lot of detail about the IDs that had been circulating within the group of authors. So many of the authors actually came together and rewrote another paper that came out at the beginning of 2020 that explained much better the IDs behind these FAIR principle, and that will really help clear up some of the misunderstandings, I think, that have occurred over the years. There are also other people that, due to, I think, to misunderstandings, have been offering to add more letters to FAIR, like O for open, like R for reproducible. And actually in the new paper, if you read it, you will find out that a lot of that actually was discussed before the original FAIR paper, and that much of what needs to be covered is actually covered by the thoughts behind the FAIR principles. I hope that gives a little bit of an answer.
I think this is what I also feel regarding this open question, FAIR and open. This is what you say, Rob. I think there has been a lot of confusion since the principles have been thought, I think, as a research data management principles, and somehow they shifted into a kind of main item in the open science, and with the focus on open. So for a certain period, I think we read open data everywhere. So everywhere popped up open access and open data then. And this is, I think, also part of the confusion. And this is also why, so if you're talking about in my institution, if I think about, okay, how should I test whether something is fairly managed? I mean, what is the aim? So principally, from the start, I think the researchers should be able to manage their research data. So this is the main aim. And afterwards, in the second step, this can have an impact on different things, on openness, so you can sharing data more easily, you can reproduce them more easily, and so on. So I think also if you talk about how to evaluate and what has been achieved, depends a little bit on what you wanted to achieve with the management of the data. So I think this is crucial, because it's not that FAIR is a synonym for everything. So this is what I would read. So, and I think in the discussion, it's always important to get back to, yeah, okay, of what we are talking about. Do we are talking about, okay, we have to open up data and to enable the researchers to be, or to ensure that the researchers are able to share data which have been, which are resulting from a publicly funded research. So they have to be fair in a certain way, and they have to ensure there's others. I mean, they might want to manage the data in a way that they can give restricted access because of different, I don't know, IPR issues or personal data issues. I imagine in medical research, for instance. So yeah, I think it's important that in the discussion you come always back to what you really want to discuss about. Was it too general? I don't know. I hope I managed to explain a bit what I think.
So basically, as a follow-up question then for this, so if you think that FAIR should not be kind of coaxed into something that it isn't, because the so the reusability always said there need to be clear pathways on how you can access or reuse the data, but it never said that the data has to be free. It can still be, can still require licensing. So, and that's, I mean, this is what we've then seen in the OSPP. Yes, FAIR is not open. These more recent attempts to develop, let's say, new acronyms, like, I mean, we've seen TRUST a couple of months ago, which is then for as a certification or as principles for data repositories, which should then kind of close the gap that, of course, if FAIR data is hosted somewhere, then we probably need also some requirements for those repositories, because those repositories play then an important role to guarantee some of those principles. Is that kind of this layered approach? Well, you have FAIR and you have other concepts, and some people might choose to combine these and others might not. Is that, from your perspective, the way forward?
So I actually prefer the fact that people say that the repository follows the trust principles than the FAIR principles. Because what has been happening is that people thought, well, you know, maybe this burden can be carried completely by the repositories. And I don't think it can be. The researcher will always have a lot of responsibilities in this any case. So of course, a good repository can really help the researcher certainly to ascertain the fairness and the accessibility of the data very well. Interoperability is a shared responsibility, and reusability as well. So to say that a repository is fair is a danger. Similarly, I think this is also a good connection to the question and the earlier question on measuring infrastructure. So there are ways of quantitatively measuring how fair data has become. There is even a group in the RDA who have been assembling all the people that have been making such frameworks to see whether these measurements are can be brought to the same language. The big danger with that kind of measuring, I find, is that if you make a binary choice, this data is fair enough and that data is not fair enough, then I think that is completely going the wrong way. I really think that it is better to see where can we make an investment to make things more fair along our journey, and at such a cost-benefit analysis that it actually is worth it, that we are not investing more than we are actually gaining out of it. But it still may be, we still may be above the barrier of how fair people really would want it. So it always, I'm very, very afraid of binary decision points. This is fair enough, this is not fair enough. I really want to encourage people to think about how they can really help science forward by making decisions based on fairness.
Okay, thanks. Any further comments on that question?
Well, maybe it's going a bit on in the question on whether fair is enough or not, or whether it has to be included further principles and so on. And I'm not so sure whether this is, I would be a little bit worried about this, because I think because the value of fair is at the moment that it's really makes intuitive sense to who should apply them. And it covers major steps of the life cycle, project of the research life cycle and the data life cycle. And if it's done well, I think so. If you're working with, I don't know, some institutional data management plans, respecting the principles and having them explained very well to the researchers and so on, I think that it should be sufficient for sharing data then in a second step, at least within a discipline. So I'm not so sure about different disciplines. But even between disciplines, probably the challenge is not so much that that there's missing element or something, but it's more about educating the researchers. So what we said before, that they need to be trained very well, and they need to be supported now. So this is, I think, one of the most important things we have to do now, because I mean, we have an established system and they should be now implemented. And they really need to understand what it means for the discipline, I think. And then they can go ahead and can combine it also with other disciplines. But first they have to understand it for the discipline. And yeah, I think this is important. So it's not so much about changing it because there is already identified a lack. It's about now implementing them well, and then see what can be changed or what can be improved. But I think we are not at this point yet. So this is what is my feeling.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then Christine, as you mentioned the questions about code, so there has been some discussion about FAIR principles is actually something that is a good idea to apply to code. There are even 2 RDA working groups, so one previous and one newly running on these questions. There are numerous papers published. So haven't thought about this whole question, code infrastructure, workflows. Is FAIR really only then for, or the FAIR principles as we define them, are they only for data, or do we need, also how can we adopt them to things that behave a little bit differently?
So I guess it would be a question for Rob, but my own take would be, I'm like the core of why I'm trying to use FAIRs, like as we said, like collaboration, reusability, etc. What matters to most people is to have consistency and quality and trust in a pipeline or in a workflow, from data inputs to trusted outputs. Can we extend slightly the definition of what a data asset is, so that the FAIR principles that everybody understands, as Eva said, that's the beauty of it, like everybody understands what we mean. Can we extend that to code so that we can tag code with metadata? We can tag Docker environments with metadata. We can make them searchable, findable, etc. It's probably like taking the dual problem of not necessarily extending FAIR to say that there's code, there's data, there's etc. But to say, can we think of data as something like more abstract in a sense, that is all the ingredients, like all the stuff that I need to go from my input to my output. And maybe, Rob, I'm asking this, like, can we make fair workflows? We can make, like, if you think like Docker files or virtualizations or containers that are very important now, can we make them fair? Like, can we make them searchable, probably findable, etc.? Can we have like repos for containers or for code? And it's really something that would make a lot of sense, like, from my practitioner perspective. Don't change the principles, change what they apply to.
Yeah, so I fully agree that software workflows, they are part of the provenance of the data that you're actually doing in your working on in your research. So they make together that the data will not become reuseless, as it sometimes say, but reusable. However, there are some complications with this, and one of the projects that I'm involved in, called Fair is Fair in Europe, is actually dealing with this as well. And that is that if you consider the fairness of software you have, or services or workflows, you have to consider two parts of fairness. In how far does this software enable the fairness of the data that it processes? So for instance, does a repository as a service support the fairness of the data? Or is the data itself findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable? And both need to be evaluated. So there will be differences, but I think indeed that the principles can be applied.
Okay, then we have one more question slash comment from the chat, which says, okay, so global label of fair isn't probably not such a smart thing to do, but in terms of implementation, shouldn't there be specific and achievable goals? Not a binary thing, but at least something like a gradual, I don't know, 1 to 5 stars fair. Is that something? I mean, we are in the last 2 minutes, so quick answers. Is that a viable vision for the future?
So if you make a 5-star thing, then some people will say, I will require 4 stars, and it becomes binary again. So that is a problem. But what I've been working with the Fair Data Maturity Model group in the RDA, and there actually a lot of the concepts behind the FAIR principles have been put into 53 basic yes/no questions that can say, are you doing this, yes or no? For instance, if you are applying an identifier, can you guarantee that identifier to your data is persistent? Can you, a different one is, can you guarantee that it's globally unique? And so you can split up the FAIR principles. I think they ended up with 53 of these binary switches for the 15 FAIR principles. And then you can, for each of those 53, you can say, how much work is it to get a yes on this question?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. Then Christine, any last things you would like to mention or bring into the discussion?
Yes, like probably going back to my first point is like Rob, you mentioned carrot, sticks. Also, somehow there are rulers in just measuring how fair, etc., etc. From a practitioner perspective, I would not like the metric to become the target. So I would not like to spend, like my career being seeing what the percentage of fair, etc., etc., etc. And I think it's important. So that's my first conclusion. Second conclusion is something that Eva mentioned at the very beginning, and we have to repeat it a lot. FAIR is not open in terms of open data. And I still have many people I work with health data who tell me, why would I even bother? I cannot share my data. And so that brings us back to the role of education in why things matter.
Okay. And then
I will quote you on that, Christine. The metric should not become the target. Is brilliant, and that's exactly what I meant.
This is Goodhart's law. So this is like a law from like it has precedence, and then it totally distorts how we move forward. And you know, I'm involved in many FAIR working groups, and too many probably. And it seems that we have meta working groups on working groups.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Eva, one short last comment.
Well, as Christine said, so my main concern for sure, but we are working as an RTO always, is that to make clear that FAIR is not open, because this would have a huge impact on various stakeholders in the research field. And the same, or what we did not touch that much, is that we should not forget, in order to increase the acceptance of FAIR and the implementation of FAIR principle, it's a cost. So this should not be forgotten in these academic discussions. As you say, Christine, there are so many working groups about detailed issues, but the main concept should take into consideration that there is a cost for the researchers, for organizations, for making them data fair, for keeping them fair, and also for sharing them, and for keeping it, archiving it for a long time, or for a longer period. And this should be somehow also discussed and hopefully also resolved. So it's partly resolved with the project during the project phase. So in the making them fair is mainly covered, but I think there are still some open issues regarding the long-term archiving costs and so on. So just as a food for thought for discussions.
Okay, thank you. Then, as we are already 3 minutes over time, thanks again, Christine, Eva, and Rob. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing your insights. So probably we can close with paraphrasing Aerosmith, "Fair's a journey, not a destination." And I hope that we can, that we will see each other at some other time, panel, whatever. Okay, pleasure. And now we have a 5 minutes, we have a break, and we'll restart at 6:10, if you're Central European time zone, with Björn Peter's panel.